Good morning. How are you doing? Perfect. So, my name is Marc Fiedler. I'm from Deutsche Telekom, and I'm happy to share with you here today our journey on the SMO development for our ORAN initiative in Deutsche Telekom. Service management and orchestration framework, basically out of the definition from ORAN. I hope you're all a bit aware about these terms, and if something is unclear, please interrupt me. So I like it to have it as much as interactive as possible. So, but let's kick it off. Basically, what I would like to share today with you is a bit our journey about what we did in ORAN, and then particularly on the development of the SMO, Service Management and Orchestration Platform, based on the open source framework ONAP. And it's not just a theoretical approach to show some polished slides. This is as well something to show concretely what we have developed and to use ONAP as a kind of framework to having right value for our operations and leveraging the complexity of ORAN. But coming just to that slide, and I think that's just showing a bit of motivation we as Deutsche Telekom running into when we started looking into ORAN, Open Radio Access Network. It's about how we can leverage from a modularity and decomposition of network functions. I think that's clear. That was one of the first goals we had. The second thing is to introduce cloud network, cloud capabilities, to introduce software capabilities in that area, and to decouple these network functions as we had that typically in the past when we introduced black box features and functions in our network. The next thing was to have the ability to use open APIs to enhance the ecosystem by introducing new vendors, new solutions into that stack, and being able to have the capabilities in the ORAN area. And for sure, you need to have automated solutions, automations, because the complexity will increase. At least that was one of the concerns, but also the experience we had. When you stack more solutions on top of each other, it's more complex. You need to have automation because you cannot handle that with the human approach as we had it in the past. So that's basically what we have seen, and basically that was the target. And to overcome all those, let's say, concerns and complexities, we started to look of how can we introduce automation solutions in that area. And for that, we, let's say, started an initiative in our company. It's called TNAP, simply stands for Telecom Network Automation Platform, which is a kind of a digital hub where software developer were started to grow up in that area of using open source and building a management platform which allows us to manage the, let's say, vendor ecosystem we have introduced for our ORAN town in Germany, where we tested the ORAN solution in a pre-production. Basically, this slide just shows up, and I will just quickly run over that. Why is network automation based on SMO mission critical, at least for us in Deutsche Telekom? I think I shared that already. The first thing is that we need to have this kind of zero-touch management. When it comes to zero-touch management, we mainly focus on this day zero, day one activities. That means the instantiation of network service into our network, into operations to introduce services. And the day one configuration is then basically to apply configs based on the definitions we had. For example, you would introduce an initial configuration. I will show that later for radio units, or basically for the entire G0P stack, CODU. And the day two would be then the next thing that you would like to optimize based on AI/ML capabilities, or this introduction of non or near real-time functionalities in that. So basically to enhance the automation capabilities. The next thing is also this, and we have this as a use case discussed a couple of times also in the ONAP area, this closed loop operations, where mainly in the beginning it was the scaling aspect, but it becomes further in this, let's say, specific radio access area to introduce use cases where operations have concrete issues today. That means we analyze data, we analyze the data feeds in the network and optimize based on the decision patterns or policies we have introduced and used ONAP as a framework to execute on that specific actions. That was some use cases we introduced also during our field tests, which was a clear target to have this entire closed loop in our operations field. On the next slide,
just one thing.
Yeah.
What is this MCI? You know, you specifically for CI/CD.
Does M just stand for magenta, as our color is? So we have an own CI/CD framework in our company, and it's called this magenta CI/CD. That's just the color. Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, basically GitLab features and functions, but we're using a kind of CI/CD framework plus the ONAP testbed, but that comes later on to introduce this automation features. Okay, this picture more or less I hope is familiar to everyone because it's follow the architecture blueprint of ORAN. It's just simply show a couple of deployment options. I will not go so much into that. Basically, where the CU, where the DU is deployed, I think that follows clearly this various of deployment options in ORAN. But the picture shows clearly when it comes to this open APIs, to have the ability to have introduction of this FCAPS functionalities, fault config, accounting, performance, and security aspects. We are using mainly in the past this O1 interface. We also introduced this, for sure, M-plane, open frontal M-plane interface for the management of the radio units, and will increase as well the interaction with the O2. I think O2 is one of the things which is currently not that mature as potentially wished, but also the initiative of Nephew could be an answer to that, because the reinventing of wheels is potentially not the best thing we should do in telco area here. But we're working also with a couple of partners in that area to have the integration of the Kubernetes stack as much as transparent to the SMO level by not introducing new functionalities in the SMO, which are basically needs to be new developed. So, but that's a different discussion. I would like to focus today on the O1 aspects, where we have introduced a couple of features and functions, and we'll hurry up a bit.
Just one thing,
yeah.
You also integrated the radio in the SMO?
Yes.
Okay. So this MP is some sort of protocol?
Management plane. Yeah.
This is specs?
That's ORAN.
So they're defined in the ORAN?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Exactly, yeah. Okay, is someone in the room who has never heard about ONAP? Because simply then I can skip this slide. Basically, just for motivation, and I have used this slide a couple of times ago. You know, how telcos operate is quite different to what potentially hyperscalers do. And we also have a couple of brownfield processes, a couple of brownfield technologies where we cannot overcome overnight and saying, okay, let's change everything we have and then let's be such as agile as the others are. So that means that is also a transition in the company, in the telco company, with our operations guys, with the developers we have built up over the years. It's really a change from how we have operated in the past decade and how we will operate in the next decade. Let's say it like that. Because automation is nothing you can just add to operations and then saying, okay, please execute, and let's say at the end hope that people are able to run this Kubernetes workloads, to being able to understand what this layering of complexity means and how at least having then the same quality as we had it before. And that is a big challenge. And that is why we started this kind of initiative to build this Digi Hub, where we had operations guys, development guys in to build such a framework. We as Deutsche Telekom, following ONAP since, let's say, more or less Amsterdam, we were in the early stages more on the observing, let's say, position, but then started to also contribute to the community, I would say, since the Frankfurt release, and now, following the track further. It's a challenge. I think we have seen that it was a bit stagnating, the contributions, and a couple of telcos stepped up or stepped down from that. But basically, currently, we're seeing a lot of benefits also by the introduction of network slicing, and what we can do out of the source code of ONAP, like developing such a huge SMO framework and building a lot of use cases on the existing code base. That's just a snippet from the last release. So we are, Cashman shared that also yesterday, that Cone is coming. A couple of new features will introduced, and that's just an overview about what was in the past release as a kind of highlight. But coming to that slide, and you can read it, a lot of things we hear every day, also internally and also outside when we read carefully all what the analysts saying outside. ONAP is a monolith. ONAP is too big. ONAP cannot be a success. What we see, that is also ONAP. And that is something which is quite different to the picture before. What we have seen before was an architecture blueprint which shows how you can introduce an end-to-end view on the service design, let's say, execution framework and the operations framework of ONAP. But behind ONAP, that's open source. So, and that is exactly the challenge. And on the one hand side, the challenge to have the complexity and managing complexity of all that, but having as well a different view for developers being involved in such, let's say, interesting journey we are currently on. And that is something where we believe that is the right approach to follow and creating innovations in such an area like ORAN and the SMO development. Potentially I have forget one of them, then sorry, excuse that, but my developer just contributed a lot to that slide, so that's currently what we see is used in ONAP. Okay, but what did we? So basically, we do not use everything which is currently in the, let's say, architecture overview, and I think that's a neutral process, and that would be something we advise to everyone, but that's a different discussion. I think we have selected the most relevant aspects out of the ONAP blueprint, enriched as well some of the components, and the result is basically an architecture view which is shown here. The main message to that slide is just basically that you see a couple of magenta boxes. Those boxes are at least enhancements to the current architecture, or at least things where we contribute back as well to the community.
So where is VNF controller? Because there are some military parts, right? Like if you see the last slide, you crossed this, VFC, SDNC.
No, SDNC, but VFC is a kind of this integration of SOL 01 to 7.8, I guess.
So you write your own
No, the approach is basically that, and that is something we have seen on the slide, just jumping back. This model-driven. Model-driven is something where we as Deutsche Telekom has really heavily pushed in the negotiation with our, for sure, network function vendors. So a couple of them are in the room today. When it comes to, we need to integrate a network model, an information model, a data model. And we use mainly YANG as a kind of definition of how this, let's say, application is defined. So the data and the information model. And we use that for having the description of what needs to be integrated and where the dependencies from an application point of view. And that's the huge difference when it comes to the selection of those boxes. All right, but now coming to the interesting part of today. Yeah.
You said that some of the components are interesting to you. Are there any components that you're missing? Any components that you think should be?
So we are currently discussing a lot in the, let's say, enhancement of DCAE, because I think what ONAP and the community nicely did was to develop a couple of microservices which allows to have an indication what can be executed and what can be done, like this KPI microservice. It's a really nice thing, but if you start really digging down into the code level, then you see you need to enhance things. And then you ask yourselves, okay, what could be an alternative approach to do a KPI calculation in real time to be able to see where my network quality is currently. And then that's something exactly where we started to also evaluate a couple of things like introducing Spark streaming technologies and things like that to understand how we can enhance that thing. So I would not say missing, but it's up to us as also Deutsche Telekom and other people to have this discussion in the, let's say, in the projects like DCE with the PTLs to discuss how we can enhance these features and functions in the futures and how we can change that. So missing a bit, but it's up to us at least to discuss how we can enhance that.
I mean, there is nothing wrong in having alternative solutions and even competing solutions.
Yep.
We heard yesterday from another OpenSource project that they're sort of encouraging competition.
Sorry, I'm not sure if that works. No, it doesn't work.
Yesterday,
This works.
Yesterday for another open source project that they are encouraging competition. And I think there is a misunderstanding in ONAP that it has to be like it is.
Exactly.
And they're sort of fixed components. It's quite possible to bring in a competitor or sort of slightly overlapping.
Exactly, and that's at the end the benefit of open source, right?
And you don't have to sort of ask permission. It's in the power of the committer that you push new things.
Yes,
yeah,
for sure. You need to upstream also the code what we, or at least what we intended to do. One thing is currently we have announced that Deutsche Telekom will contribute a new portal to the ONAP community. It's currently as well discussed in the TSC. It's currently just a proposal. Let's see if it will be agreed, but if so, it will be part in the, I guess, London release. And that's not because it's the most simplest thing to develop such a portal. Don't get us wrong. You will see it in a minute why we did that. It's also to have a secure ability also to introduce multi-tenancy potential in the future. We have worked quite a lot on that, and that was one of the features which was missing from the beginning onwards. But I'm not sure if you're so deeply involved, but if you use SDC, for example, you, let's say, have the ability to control and change everything, but you cannot differentiate, and that's depending on your company, if business unit A or business unit B has different responsibilities, and they should just see their models and can influence and introduce the models to operations. That's a thing we are working as well on it, but that's just a side effect to having a kind of new approach of security when you step into ONAP, having a portal where you can distinguish on rights, users, and specific aspects, then down to all the projects underneath. I need to speed up a bit. How many time I have? Sorry.
10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes exactly. Thank you. Sorry. So the SMO development. On that slide, basically, we see a bit redundant view on what we have seen before, but on the right-hand side, that's the important aspect. When we started this SMO journey, we decided to follow a couple of use cases and, let's say, challenges we want to integrate. The first one was to integrate a 4G, 5G product, a modeled 4G, 5G product, introducing this day 0, day 1, and day 2 configurations. We wanted to have a KPI calculation and performance measurement implemented. What you potentially all might know from a classical element management system, which is available today. Also the ability to have fault management implemented, performance management I already said, and the basic policy introduction for network optimization. What you see here is basically and I just had a couple of screenshots here, but it shows a bit how we did that. The service instantiation is one of the parts. In the past, we had VID in ONAP, and we did it by our own. We had the ability to instantiate network services into our production chain. That means on the other side, we were able to instantiate a CU, a DU, an RU separately based on the design patterns on ONAP. That means we have designed a network server classically, and then being able to instantiate network instances out of our portal here. We have the same ability to completely do it without any manual interaction, but having operations involved, you need to kind of have a GUI which allows them to understand and see what happens. So the same thing can be done easily by our Magenta CI/CD platform to just instantiate entirely automatically the network services. But you know, just instantiating a single CU, a single DU, and RU potentially is not that sufficient as we want to have it, because deploying a G-Node B or an entire G-Node B service in the network is a bit more than just a single CU, because you have all the dependencies and CUUP, CUCP, a DU, you need to register them to them, and the same for the RU. So for that purpose, a small animation here, but it shows you how we did that because we were able to entirely automatically deploy a G-Node B service. What we did is basically we introduced the run and planning process, which allows us to have all this, let's say, desired configurations in the CI/CD chain, and having a process to provide those informations to ANAI, which says that is the desired state of our G-Node B. So ANAI is aware about CU, DU information, RU information, and all those dependencies. That is something like a planning process. Then the service design phase starts, and what we did is basically classical approach. We define the service in SDC. We can do it manually, we can do it automatically. It's just here for demonstration purpose, and introduce all those model information from the SDC point of view to all the components which needs to be aware about config aspects like CDS for further day one configuration. Then we start basically to deploy the G-Node B. What we do there is basically service orchestrator is referencing to the G-Node B model, which is already instantiated before, as I said, and update the inventory based on the service information. Then we start to deploy this G-Node B service and instantiating all those relevant components which I have told you before. In this case, the CUCP. We deploy the CUCP on Kubernetes, and the model in ANAI is updated towards the defined state after the instantiation is done. The same for the CUUP. Sorry. They will be instantiated. The containers are deployed and specifically updated towards the CUCP information. The same for the DU. And last but not least, after the RU process is a bit decoupled, I think you know that a bit, that depending on that the radio unit is powered on. After the radio unit is powered on, they will automatically send a DHCP request. It will be analyzed based on specific informations coming out of the radio unit, like serial numbers. We have this information based on whitelisting and I'm not sure it's allowed to say that, blacklisting. It's hard for me to find the right wording for that. No offense. And those informations are stored. And if the radio unit is allowed to come up in the network, the radio unit will as well instantiate it and updated information to the DU. This entire process is automated, and we have implemented and showed that in our ORAN city. And that is a perfect example that ONAP can be used to just instantiate a single network instance, a single container, but you can also do that as a quite complex scenario for deploying a G-Node B service.
question.
Yeah.
In terms of using it in a live production environment, what are your thoughts on that? Like how practical is it?
As we are currently in pre-production and testing all those developments and aspects, the main goal was really to have the ability to automate as much as possible and having, let's say, the classical operations processes integrated. So that means, and if you are aware, you have a department which is taking care of all this planning aspects. You have a department who is taking care of the operations aspect, but the complexity needs to be lower to a level that everyone, let's say, can concentrate on those aspects like optimizing the network, optimizing specific functions. That was the goal. Let's say we are heavily convinced that this approach will work. For sure, there's a couple of things needs to be optimized and further developed, but that looks promising.
Sounds very good. Positive.
One question. What is the usage of the plan node versus the deployed node?
That is the, so we have updated, so we gave this information towards ANAI in the planning phase to say, okay, that is the state where we want, and then update the specific information during the instantiation. So that means CUP is up and running,
Okay.
but CUCP not. This kind of information was needed.
So it is used as a reference to make sure that...
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Along that same lines, what type of data artifact are you using to import
A simple one. Currently, it's CSV.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Because
it's
this is not
the checklist, the pre-deployment checklist, but
for the config data here. You mean, right? Yeah, for the config data, it's exactly that. So we needed to have a kind of, we have not that, let's say, APIs currently available that allows to have a planning tool which is sitting on top and provides this information natively. That's currently not the case. That's what I said with Brownfield.
ENC uses the planning data to fill in the
Exactly.
variables during the instantiate flow.
That is something, that's a good one. Give me a second. I will jump over to a slide here. And now it comes to this config management, because that's exactly what you said. What we currently have, and we are using for the config management two things, it's the CDS, Controller Design Studio, which is enabled by using the macro service instantiation of the service orchestrator in ONAP, having these two, let's say, layers there. We have the layer of getting the planning information from the engineering department and storing them in a new way in CPS. We have Toyna also here, which is, let's say, the persistent storage of configuration.
So CPS holds future and current.
Exactly.
Those hold past.
Yes, that's this exactly use case we had here, the validation of the desired state of the configuration and the current information. And based on those informations, we are able to update in the network this famous day 2 configuration, the state.
Which entity is doing the validation? So the new one, the new tool that we made?
Exactly. And based on that, we have this use case to A, send an alarm if the configuration is different, or B, having a simple update on the configuration if that is currently, let's say, target. Sorry?
Is that alarm versus?
That's a classical alarm, really sending a notification in the portal to say, hey, there is potentially a risk or something someone needs to be aware. But if there's a policy which says, okay, if that will happen, then it's simply this netconf request to change the configuration. Just focus a second. I will jump over the service orchestration. If someone is interested on that, we can talk offline. That's also something we did in the portal based on everything which has come out of ONAP. We have a complete entire fault management implemented so that operations get all those informations. You see here we have one message which shows all the information coming out of the inventory and specific systems which are needed to enhance this view. The operator is able to select and filter on all the severities which is predefined. So it's a kind of combined view on having an automation and having the ability to operate a network based on ONAP. The same as we have integrated the performance management in the classical way that the graphs will be calculated in real time. So I told that in the beginning, this, for example, KPI microservice, but also we have the ability natively to integrate Grafana, which has at least two choices of consuming the performance metrics. Config management, I shared it already, and that's something we also contributing back to the community with some developers to enhance the capabilities of CPS, thanks to Ericsson who introduced this, and on the other hand, CDS, which is, at least for us in the last years, the game changer to having really an opportunity for modern config management.
In the plan that you put out, does it also have the RU config as well? I know you don't list it on the right.
We have not listed it on the right because it's RU is one of the latest things we have done, and currently, but I would say there's no huge differences. Could be also for the RU unit.
It's a Yang model, and it's
Exactly.
and it's
We have just,
it has to be as a PNF in your service model too.
and that is what we have done exactly. That's a new one that also the PNF is part of the G node B, but we can differentiate on during the instantiation phase if it's a, let's say, network service like a COUP, CP, or DU, or is it a PNF like an RU? But that was one of the things which was the last one that the PNF is part of this G node B model.
Your overall app onboarding, is that more like a CSAR and an ETSI model, or is it
No, it's completely.
ASR, or your own custom?
It's basically young, entirely young. Yeah. And one of the things which are also quite a huge requirement from operations department is that has this kind of tree view to browse config, to browse configuration information in a specific case, like here in a CP, in a UP, or in a DU, and then we have the ability to see the current configuration which are deployed in the network. All right. Last but not least, I also will give you an idea of what we are doing in the area of managing the huge complexity of ONAP themselves. We have a fantastic system team which is covering all those aspects. Potentially, I cannot explain everything in the right direction, but this ORM is a kind of project which is currently running and dealing the entire management of all the components in ONAP, and we want to make that more cloud native. That is a huge approach. We're currently contributing back to the community, introducing Argo CD, also to have the ability to use Argo CD as a single or as an entity who is able to manage single components in ONAP, which is a bit different to the approach today. We also want to having a better build and deploy time of the ONAP components. It takes currently a bit too long, honestly. That's something we will improve and upstream specific aspects there. Also, the integration of service mesh and Istio is planned and currently on the roadmap, and a couple of more other things. The main message out of that slide is, you see it here, this change CI approach, and this approach we have here is something we want to merge. So at the end, it is hopefully just one installer available. Also from our point of view, we see a lot of benefits to improve this here, because that is the next step also for ONAP to have this kind of operations maturity and helping the community to push that further also to other operations. This change CI is currently the approach in ONAP for testing and deployment. Yeah. All right. That's it. Thanks.